In this video we are going to take a closer look at an HQ choice for the Deathwatch that got a massive boost in 9th edition, the Librarians. Fear not the Psyker. That old Dawn of War reference has never been more accurate. From footslogging to chump pack to sneaky and even a named one, there are several datasheets to pick from, but which one of these are actually good in the Deathwatch? In order to answer this, we will first take a look at some base stats, abilities and wargear. Then we will go through how to specifically make use of Librarians in a Deathwatch army. Lastly, there will be some modeling recommendations and a quick wrap up.
Welcome to SwissHammer, your channel for modeling in Warhammer 40k. My name is Tammer and I will be guiding you through this video.
For a Deathwatch army, the following 5 Librarian datasheets are currently available for matched play. There is the classic Firstborn Librarian, the Primaris Librarian, the Phobos Librarian, the Librarian in Terminator armor, as well as our named character Codicier Natorian. As the name suggests, the main reasons for these different datasheets are usually either a generational matter, aka Firstborn versus Primaris, or the armor type that they are wearing, which in turn affects their stats and abilities. Speaking of stats and abilities, in a nutshell, a Librarian shares the basic Space Marine stats of a Watch Sergeant with double the wounds. Nothing impressive there, but that's not why we want them in the first place, as we will see in just a moment. In case of the Primaris versions, he gets an extra wound and an extra attack, or in case of the Terminator armor variant, he gets a 2+ armor save and the teleport strike ability, which is the standard for these types of datasheets. Where it gets truly interesting though are the abilities, as Librarians are warriors of the mind, or psychers, as they are more commonly referred to. A psyker can attempt to manifest 2 psychic powers in your psychic phase, and attempt to deny 1 psychic power in your opponent's psychic phase. By default, they know Smite and 2 psychic powers from the Librarians Discipline, to which we will get later in the video. Furthermore, they also get the Psychic Hood ability, which grants them +1 to their Deny the Witch test if the unit attempting to manifest the psychic power is within 12 inches of this model. What perhaps stands out when compared to the Captain or the Chaplain is the lack of an invul save, making the Librarian quite a fragile HQ. Furthermore, the Librarian can also be upgraded to a Chief Librarian through the chapter command upgrade at 25 points. Those familiar with my guide to the Apothecary and the Chaplain already know that for these 2 characters, the Warlord trait attached to the upgrade is pretty much mandatory. For the Librarian, however, the situation is a little different. The Chief Librarian upgrade itself unlocks a 3rd psychic power from their chosen discipline, and they can then deny 1 additional power. The Warlord trait, Psychic Mastery, then adds 1 to psychic tests taken for the Librarian, which is handy, but by no means mandatory like the trait of the Chaplain or the Apothecary. In practice, while Psychic Mastery has made some appearances in competitive play, with the limited availability of starting CP in Warzone Nephilim, this one is usually skipped in favor of other more important Warlord traits. It's not a bad pick by any means, but usually you just won't have the spare CP. The same goes for the Chief Librarian upgrade itself. On paper, it is a nice upgrade, but in case you are already paying premium for a Watchmaster, a Master of Sanctity, and mandatory specialism in an army of renown, points for further upgrades just won't be available. But returning to the Librarian psychic powers, the previously mentioned default Librarians Discipline is decent. It includes for instance Might of Heroes, which was popular with Dreadnoughts, a 5+ invul bubble, or the more niche Null Zone that can strip invul saves, but in case of the Deathwatch, for the time being, forget about anything other than the Deathwatch exclusive Xenopurge Discipline, which is the main reason why Librarians have found their way back into competitive Deathwatch lists in 9th edition. The 2 powers that stand out here are Promorphic Resonance and Fortified with Contempt, both of which are auto-includes when taking a standard librarian with access to 2 powers. Primorphic Resonance. Select one friendly Deathwatch unit within 18 inches of the Psyker. The unit's Overwatch attack hit on a 5+, it can fight first in the fight phase, and you get +1 to hit in melee. This is a massive boost to popular Proteus or Indomitor kill team compositions found in competitive play. Fortified with Contempt. Select one friendly Deathwatch infantry or biker unit within 18 inches. Each time a model would lose a wound on a 5+, that wound is not lost. So basically, this is a 5+ feel no pain save, which can make big kill team blobs incredibly tanky. For those wondering whether this makes the 6+ aura of the Apothecary redundant, the answer is no. While you want Fortified with Contempt over the Apothecary aura, the former is single target and you might fail to successfully cast. It is always great to have an Apothecary aura as backup, and/or for the aura ability affecting multiple units at once. The only question is whether you can manage to fit an Apothecary or not. But anyway, moving on to the third important psychic power, Mantle of Shadow. Select the Deathwatch infantry unit within 12 inches of the Psyker. If the unit does not shoot or declare a charge, they cannot be targeted by enemy ranged attacks unless they are within 12 inches or are the closest eligible unit. This one can be really great to get kill teams, or even Centurions, more safely across the board, but as previously mentioned, unless you can afford the Chief Librarian premium upgrade, this should be skipped in favor of the other 2 powers. Same goes for the remaining 3 powers, Neural Void, Psychic Lens, Severance. These are all just not worth it over the others and should not be taken for the time being. With these basic rules covered, how can we best use a librarian in the Deathwatch? Out of all the datasheets available, the main question for the librarian is how many points are you willing to spend for a powerful yet fragile support character. The cheapest possible option is the Firstborn Librarian at 90 points, followed by the Primaris variant with the extra wound at 95 points, and the Phobos Librarian at 100 points, which gets Camo Cloak and Concealed Positions over the regular Primaris variant. Ultimately, you want your librarian to hang back as far as possible and just buff your kill teams. While a Firstborn Librarian with a jump pad would make for optimal mobility, 115 points is a pricey investment. Mobility without the jump pack is not great, but similar to the Watchmaster, it can be done if you know where you're going, and compared to the Watchmaster, the positioning is easier as you really just want to be in cast range of your kill teams. Personally, I am hugely in favor of the Phobos Librarian due to both Camo Cloak and Concealed Positions, which is usually worth the investment when paired with a Spectre's kill team, which is pretty much mandatory in Warzone Nephilim. Outside of the Army of Renown, I would even consider the Phobos Librarian as mandatory, because you need one Phobos HQ for the Lord of Deceit Warlord trait. Both the Watchmaster and the Chaplain are unavailable for this, leaving the Phobos Librarian as the only alternative. In the Army of Renown, you can move this Warlord trait to the Infiltrator Sergeant of the Spectre's kill team, granting him an extra wound and removing the Phobos HQ requirement, but personally, I think since Lord of Deceit allows a free redeploy of 3 units, I like the fact that I can redeploy my Librarian if needed. Plus, I like Camo Cloak as a bit of a situational defensive upgrade, given the lack of an inbuilt invul save. This leaves us with the 2 datasheets that I would consider non-competitive. First, we have the Librarian in Terminator armor. As veteran viewers well know, I am not a fan of these kind of HQs. I want my Librarian on the battlefield, and I dislike the movement penalty over the other variants. While this may be a way to get access to a 5+ invul save, I still don't think it's worth it. Then lastly, Codicier Natorian is decently priced at 100 points, comes with the Xenopurge Discipline that we want anyway, and his lack of the Chief Librarian upgrade might not even bother us in most lists. What kills him for me personally, lack of upgrade aside, is that we have to pay for the Nowhere to Hide Warlord trait. By no means a bad pick, but we want the librarian parked as far back as possible, preventing him from sharing his aura, and in Warzone Nephilim specifically, we likely won't have to CP for that warlord trade anyway. All in all, librarians make a great addition to almost any Deathwatch list, the limiting factor usually being how many points you want to invest on top of the default firstborn datasheet. With that being said, let's have a look at some modeling recommendations. When going for the firstborn librarian, I recommend magnetizing the jump pack, as this is something that may or may not find its way into a competitive list depending on points. Furthermore, in case you went for the Kill Team Cassius box, which has such beautiful models for various conversions, you can even take Codicil Netorian himself, magnetize him a jump pack option, and you can play him as a regular firstborn librarian. Keep an eye on your relics though, as Codicil Netorian originates from the Blood Ravens chapter. For those with a spare foot-slogging Primaris Chaplain model from the Indomitus box set, and no need to kit bash a Primaris Chaplain on bike, as explained in my guide to the Chaplains, it is fairly easy to convert that model to a librarian, giving him a different weapon and helmet, including a psychic hood modeled from green stuff and or spare bits, pretty much what I did for my own model. To wrap things up, over the course of the video, we have looked at the various librarians and what they bring to the Deathwatch nowadays. While there are several competitive datasheets available, the decision usually boils down to how many points can you spare and whether you play the Army of Renown or not. Outside of the Army of Renown, I personally still consider the Phobos Librarian as a mandatory pick for the Lord of Deceit Warlord trade. Unlike the Chaplain or the Apothecary, the Chapter Command upgrade to Chief Librarian is by no means mandatory, but it can be nice in case you need that third Xenopurge Discipline power. Speaking of which, both Premorphic Resonance and Fortified with Contempt are auto-includes, with Mantle of Shadow being a potential third candidate for a Chief Librarian. As a general strategy, you can try to keep your librarian as far back as possible. He tends to be quite fragile, and his primary role is to cast the psychic powers on the kill team. Last but not least, librarians are fairly easy to kit bash from spare models, such as an Indomitus Chaplain, and in case of the firstborn model, magnetizing the jump pack is recommended. So that's it for the librarians in the Deathwatch. Which variants are you guys using these days, or are you sticking to other HQs instead? Do you have the Xenopurge Discipline glued to your librarian, or are you also playing with the other disciplines once in a while? Let me know in the comments. Finally, I would also like to mention that there is a SwissHammer Facebook page, where I will be posting links to my videos, as well as articles I find of interest. I do read a lot about the hobby, but not all of it will always end up as its own video. I look forward to seeing you there as well. I do also have a Patreon page. If you like my content, any additional support is greatly appreciated as it helps me invest into future videos. As always, thank you very much for watching guys, your continued support is greatly appreciated. I hope you have been enjoying this video, give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again and see you next time.